There's a building in Basel, Switzerland, that holds more power than the White House, the Kremlin, and the European Parliament combined. But you've never heard of it. Your elected officials don't control it. Your country's laws don't apply to it. And the people who run it, they meet in secret every 2 months to make decisions that determine whether your currency survives, whether your economy crashes, whether your savings evaporate overnight. This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This is the Bank for International Settlements, the most powerful financial institution on earth. And it operates completely outside democratic control. No accountability, no transparency, no oversight, just ... Absolute power concentrated in the hands of unelected technocrats who answer to no one. They don't just influence the global economy. They are the global economy. And what they're planning right now in those closed-door meetings will reshape the future of money itself. The question is, will you even know it's happening until it's too late? The story begins with blood, with war, with the ashes of the First World War still smoldering across Europe. 1919, the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was crushed, defeated, and the victorious powers wanted payment, reparations, 132 billion gold marks. An impossible sum. A debt designed not just to compensate for damage, but to humiliate, to ensure Germany could never rise again. But here's the problem. How do you actually collect that kind of money? How do you transfer wealth between nations when the international financial system is shattered? When currencies are unstable? When trust between countries has evaporated? You need a mechanism, a neutral institution, a bank that exists above national interests. And so in 1930, in the elegant city of Basel, Switzerland, the Bank for International Settlements was born, created by the Young Plan, designed to manage German reparations and facilitate international monetary cooperation. At least, that's what they told the public. But from the very beginning, the BIS was something else entirely. Something more. The founding members weren't governments. They were central banks, the Bank of England, the Reichsbank, the Bank of France, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Italy, the Bank of Belgium. And they didn't just create a payment processor. They created a club, an exclusive society where the most powerful bankers in the world could meet, coordinate, share information, and make decisions that would shape global finance for generations. And they gave this institution something unprecedented, something that should terrify anyone who values democracy or accountability. They gave it sovereign immunity, complete diplomatic protection. The BIS wasn't subject to Swiss law, wasn't subject to anyone's law. Its premises couldn't be searched. Its archives couldn't be seized. Its communications couldn't be It existed in a legal void, a financial Vatican, a place where the normal rules of civilization simply didn't apply. And in those early years, in the chaos of the 1930s, that immunity became dangerous because the BIS didn't just facilitate legitimate international banking. It became a tool, a weapon, a way for certain powerful interests to operate beyond the reach of governments. When Hitler rose to power in Germany, when the Nazi regime began its conquest of Europe, the BIS didn't shut down, didn't sever ties, didn't refuse to do business with fascists. Instead, it helped them. This isn't controversial history. This isn't disputed. It's documented fact. Throughout the Second World War, the Bank for International Settlements continued operations. It held board meetings that included representatives from both Allied and Axis powers, sitting in the same room during an active war, making financial decisions while their countries were slaughtering each other on battlefields. And more than that, much more than that, the BIS facilitated the transfer of looted Nazi gold stolen from conquered nations, gold extracted from the teeth of Holocaust victims, gold that financed Hitler's war machine. The BIS laundered it, made it legitimate, allowed Nazi Germany to convert plundered wealth into international currency. The American Thomas McKittrick served as president of the BIS during the war. He maintained contact with Nazi officials, facilitated transactions that violated Allied trading with enemy laws. And when the war ended, when the full horror of Nazi crimes became undeniable. There were calls to dissolve the BIS at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, where the post-war financial system was designed. Delegates voted to liquidate the Bank for International Settlements. They recognized it as a corrupted institution, a tool that had enabled atrocities. But that liquidation, it never happened. Why? Because the central bankers wanted it to survive. Because the BIS had become too useful, too powerful, too embedded in the architecture of international finance. So instead of being dissolved, instead of facing consequences for its collaboration with Nazi Germany, the BIS simply ... continued. The resolution to liquidate was quietly shelved. The calls for accountability faded, and the most powerful financial institution in the world survived without consequence, without reform, without any fundamental change to its structure or immunity. Think about that for a moment. Think about what that reveals. An institution that facilitated Nazi gold laundering, that operated during the Holocaust, that helped finance Hitler's war, faced no meaningful punishment, suffered no consequences. Why? Because the people who ran the world as central banks decided it was more important to preserve their private club than to seek justice. And that decision, that choice to value institutional power over moral accountability, set the pattern for everything that followed. Because if the BIS could survive collaboration with Nazi Germany, if it could escape consequences for enabling genocide, then what couldn't it survive? What line could it possibly cross that would threaten its existence? After the war, the BIS transformed. It stopped being primarily about German reparations and became something far more ambitious. It became the coordinating hub for central banks worldwide, a place where the governors of the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bundesbank, the Bank of Japan, and dozens of other institutions would meet regularly to discuss policy, coordinate actions, and set the rules for global banking. And they did this in complete secrecy. The meetings weren't publicized. The minutes weren't released. The decisions weren't subject to democratic review. Just ... Unelected technocrats making choices that would affect billions of lives. And the BIS gave them something invaluable. A neutral territory, a place where they could speak freely without political pressure, without media scrutiny, without having to answer to voters or parliaments or anyone except themselves. And over the decades, the BIs accumulated more power, more influence, more control over the fundamental architecture of global finance. In 1974, it created the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, a group of central bankers and regulators who would write the rules for international banking. And those rules, those Basel Accords, they didn't just regulate banks. They determined how much capital banks needed to hold, how much risk they could take, what kind of assets were safe and what was dangerous. And these rules ... these technical, boring sounding regulations, they shaped the entire global financial system. They determined which countries could access credit, which businesses could grow, which innovations were allowed. And who made these rules? Unelected central bankers meeting in Basel. No democratic input, no public debate, just decisions made in private and imposed globally. If you're restarting to feel like the entire global financial system is a game you were uninvited to play, ... If you're realizing that decisions affecting your life are being made by people you've never heard of in meetings you queue and access, then you need to understand what comes next. Because the BIS isn't just maintaining power, it's expanding it. And what they're building now will determine the future of money itself. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because this isn't just history. This is happening right now, and you need to see it. By the 1980s and 90s, the BIS had become the central nervous system of global finance. When there was a crisis, when markets panicked, ... when currencies collapsed, central banks would coordinate through the BIs. It facilitated emergency loans, organized bailouts, managed the plumbing of international settlements. And it did all of this outside the view of democratic institutions, outside the control of elected governments. The BIS had become what some called the central bank of central banks, a super institution that sat above national sovereignty, that operated beyond legal jurisdiction, that wielded power without accountability, and the people who ran it, the governors of major central banks, They liked it that way. They believed that monetary policy was too important, too technical, too complex to be subject to democratic control. They believed that central banks needed independence from political pressure, and the BIs was the ultimate expression of that philosophy. Total independence, total immunity, total power. But here's what they don't tell you. Here's what gets buried beneath all the technical jargon about monetary stability and international cooperation. Independence from democratic control isn't neutrality. It's its own form of politics. When unelected officials make decisions about money supply, about interest rates, about banking regulations, they're making choices about who wins and who loses, about which sectors get cheap credit and which get starved, about which countries prosper and which collapse. These aren't technical decisions. They're political decisions dressed up as technical expertise, and when those decisions are made in secret by people who don't answer to voters, by an institution that can't be held accountable, that's not independence. That's oligarchy. That's ruled by a technocratic elite who believe they know better than the people they govern. And the Basel Accords. Those regulations written by the BII, they created the conditions for the 2008 financial crisis. Basel II reduced capital requirements for banks that held highly rated mortgage-backed securities. It told banks these assets were safe, could be leveraged aggressively, and the banks listened. They loaded up on toxic mortgages, created derivatives, built a house of cards, and when it collapsed, when Lehman Brothers fell and the global financial system teetered on the edge of complete meltdown, where did central bankers turn? To the BIS. They met in Basel, coordinated massive interventions, created trillions in new money, bailed out the banks, and they did it all in secret meetings, making decisions worth trillions of dollars, determining which institutions survived and which died, all without democratic input, all without public accountability. The people who wrote the rules that enabled the crises, they were the same people who managed the response to the crisis. They investigated themselves and found themselves blameless. But it gets worse, much worse, because in the aftermath of the crisis, the BIS didn't lose power. It gained it. Basel III was implemented. Stricter rules, more oversight, more coordination between central banks, and the BIS became even more central to global finance. It became the place where systemically important banks were designated, where stress tests were designed, where the rules for too big to fail were written, and nobody asked the fundamental question. Nobody challenged the premise. Why should an institution with complete immunity from law, with no democratic oversight, with a history of collaboration with fascist regimes and repeated regulatory failures, why should that institution have more power, more control, more influence over the lives of billions of people? The terrifying answer is that there's no one to stop them. National governments can't audit the BIs, can't regulate it, can't impose accountability, because the BIS exists above national jurisdiction. It's protected by international treaties that give it sovereign status. It has diplomatic immunity. Its staff can't be prosecuted. Its premises can't be searched. Its communications can't be intercepted. It's literally untouchable. And the only people who can change that are central bankers themselves. The very people who benefit from the BIS's power, who use it to coordinate policy, who meet there to discuss strategies without political interference. They're not going to voluntarily surrender that power. They're not going to subject themselves to democratic oversight because they genuinely believe that they're protecting the world from chaos, that their technical expertise is essential, that democratic control of monetary policy would be disastrous. And maybe they're right. Maybe central bank independence is necessary for stability. Maybe democratic control would lead to inflation, to populist policies, to economic chaos. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. Who gets to decide? Who determines whether monetary policy should be democratic or technocratic? Who chooses whether the people should have a say in decisions that fundamentally affect their lives? Because right now, that choice has been made for you by institutions created almost a century ago, by men who believed that ordinary people couldn't be trusted with financial decisions, by a system designed to insulate power from accountability. And that system, that architecture of undemocratic control, has been expanding ever since. Today, the BIS employs over 600 people from 60 different countries. It holds regular meetings for central bank governors. It produces research that shapes global financial policy. It coordinates responses to crises. It writes the rules for international banking. And it operates with an annual budget that most people never see, because the BIS doesn't answer to taxpayers. It doesn't publish detailed financial statements. It doesn't explain how it spends money or who it pays. It just operates in shadows, making decisions, accumulating power, and the people who run it, the governors of major central banks, they rotate through, they serve for a few years, make their decisions, and then they leave, often to lucrative positions in private banking, because that's the revolving door. That's the system. Central bankers regulate banks, then join banks, then return to regulation. And the BIS is where those connections are maintained, where the club meets, where the next moves are coordinated. But the real transformation, the truly dystopian development, is happening right now. Today, the BIS is at the center of the push for central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, digital money issued directly by central banks. And they're not just studying this, they're actively building it. The BIS Innovation Hub is developing the technology, testing prototypes, coordinating with central banks worldwide to replace physical cash with programmable digital currency. And they present this as progress, as innovation, as the natural evolution of money. But think about what it really means. Think about what you're giving up with physical cash. You have privacy. You have autonomy. You can transact without permission, without surveillance, without someone monitoring every purchase, every transaction, every financial decision. But with CBDCs, with central bank digital currency, that privacy disappears. Every transaction becomes trackable. Every purchase becomes data. Every financial decision becomes visible to the issuing authority. And more than that, much more than that, the currency becomes programmable. It can have expiration dates. It can be restricted to certain purchases. It can be frozen. It can be confiscated, all with a keystroke. All without your consent. And who's coordinating this transformation? Who's building the architecture for global digital currency? The Bank for International Settlements, the institution with no democratic accountability, the institution that facilitated Nazi gold transfers, the institution that wrote the regulations that enabled the 2008 crisis. That institution, that club of central bankers operating beyond legal oversight. They're building the future of money, and they're doing it in secret, in closed meetings, without public debate, without your permission. They're creating a system where every transaction is monitored, where financial privacy becomes impossible, where the power to freeze your assets, to control your purchases, to determine what you can and cannot buy. That power will rest with central banks, with the BIs, with unelected technocrats who believe they know what's best for you. Are you comfortable with that? Are you willing to trust that kind of power to an institution that operates in complete darkness, that has repeatedly failed to prevent crises, that collaborated with Nazi Germany and faced no consequences, that exists specifically to avoid democratic control? Because that's the world we're building. That's the future the BIS is creating. And once that infrastructure is in place, once physical cash is eliminated and all money becomes digital and programmable, there's no going back. The cage will be complete. The control will be total, and your financial freedom, your ability to transact privately, to save without permission, to escape surveillance, it will simply cease to exist. And here's what keeps me awake at night. Here's what should terrify anyone who values liberty. This isn't a conspiracy that needs to be uncovered. This is policy being implemented openly. Central banks around the world are announcing CBDC projects. The BIS is publishing research papers. The technology is being developed in real time. And most people Most people don't even know it's happening, don't understand what's being taken from them, don't realize that the elimination of cash is the elimination of financial privacy, of economic autonomy, of the ability to exist outside the system's surveillance. And the BIS, the institution that's coordinating all of this, they're not elected, they're not accountable. They don't answer to you, they answer to each other, to the club, to the network of central bankers who believe that money is too important to be left to democratic choice. So what do? How do you resist when the institutions making these decisions operate beyond your reach? When your elected officials have no control over central bank policy? When the architecture of financial control is being built brick by brick and there is no democratic mechanism to stop it? Some people turn to Bitcoin, to decentralize money that can't be controlled by central authorities. And maybe that's wise. Maybe that's the only escape route. But the BIS sees that too. They're not ignoring crypto. They're studying it, preparing regulations, building systems to control it. Because that's what they do. That's what the BIS has always done. Identify threats to central bank power and neutralize them. Absorb innovations that threaten control and turn them into tools of surveillance. They did it with banking. They're doing it with digital currency. And they'll do it with whatever comes next. But here's the thing about power. This concentrated, here's the vulnerability in a system this centralized. It's brittle. It depends on trust, on legitimacy, on people believing that central banks act in the public interest. And that trust, that legitimacy, it's eroding. People are starting to ask questions, starting to wonder why central bank independence means complete opacity, why monetary policy discussions happen in secret, why the people who regulate banks are the same people who profit from banking. The BIS operates in darkness because sunlight would destroy it. Because if people truly understood the power it wields, the decisions it makes, the lack of accountability it enjoys, they would demand change. They would demand transparency. They would demand that something claiming to serve the public good should answer to the public. And that's the paradox. That's the weakness at the heart of the entire system. The BIS has unlimited power, but no legitimacy. It can make decisions affecting billions, but can't explain those decisions to the people affected. It operates beyond democratic control, but depends on democratic societies to enforce its rules. It's powerful, but it's also fragile. Because institutional power without popular legitimacy eventually collapses. It might take years, it might take decades, but it collapses. History proves this again and again. Institutions that serve elite interests while ignoring the people they govern, they don't last. They rot from within. They lose the ability to adapt. They become so disconnected from reality that they make catastrophic mistakes. And when the crisis comes, when the system they've built fails spectacularly, there's no reservoir of public trust to draw on, no goodwill to sustain them, just anger. Just a recognition that we were betrayed, that the people claiming to protect us were actually protecting themselves. The Bank for International Settlements represents the ultimate concentration of financial power, the apex of technocratic control, the final form of undemocratic governance disguised as technical expertise, and it's building a future where money is surveillance, where transactions are, where financial privacy is extinct, where your ability to save, to spend, to exist economically is subject to approval from institutions you don't control and can't hold accountable. And they're doing this openly, proudly, because they believe they have the right, because they believe they know better, because they've convinced themselves that democracy is too messy, too irrational, too dangerous to be trusted with something as important as money. But whose money is it? Whose economy is it? Whose lives are shaped by these decisions? It's ours, yours, mine, the billions of people who work and save and try to build futures for our families. We're not too stupid to understand monetary policy. We're not too irrational to make financial decisions. We're just excluded. Deliberately kept in the dark by institutions that benefit from our ignorance. That depend on complexity to maintain power, that use technical jargon to obscure simple truths. And the simple truth is this: The Bank for International Settlements is the most powerful financial institution on earth. It operates without democratic oversight. It makes decisions that affect your life, and you have zero control over it, zero input, zero recourse. That's not independence. That's tyranny. And every day we accept it. Every day we let this system operate unchallenged. We're surrendering more of our freedom, more of our privacy, more of our economic autonomy. So here's the real question. The only question that matters: what are you going to do about it? Are you going to forget this video and go back to pretending everything is fine? Are you going to trust that the people meeting in Basel have your best interests at heart? Or are you going to start asking questions, demanding answers, refusing to accept that an institution this powerful should operate in complete darkness? Because change, real change doesn't start with legislation or reform or institutions policing themselves. It starts with consciousness, with understanding, with enough people finally seeing the cage and refusing to pretend it's freedom. If this has opened your eyes to the invisible architecture of power that governs the global economy, if you can feel the walls closing in as digital currency eliminates the last spaces of financial privacy, then you need to see what we reveal next. Because the BIS is coordinating something bigger than CBDCs. Something that connects every central bank, every major corporation, every government into a single system of control. It's called the Great Reset. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It's policy. Subscribe now. Share this with everyone who needs to understand. And prepare yourself for the truth about what they're building while we sleep. Because the cage is almost complete. And once those doors lock, there's no escape.